This Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, is at war with the state of Texas. And I want to tell you why. Because if Texas ever goes Democrat, there's no conceivable way the Republicans can ever win the presidency. And so Eric Holder has as his mission, to destroy voter integrity in Texas, to prevent border security in Texas, and I'm going to prove it to you. The Supreme Court ruled not too long ago that voter identification requirements, as long as they're reasonable, are solutions to voter integrity concerns, and that states can pass them. In other words, this has already been addressed by the Supreme Court of the United States. So regulations imposing ordinary burdens, such as those requiring a nominal effort by all voters treated equally, are not considered severe. They're not considered obstructions to the voting process. They're not considered discriminatory against one group or another. And how could they be? You couldn't get on an airplane today without a government-issued photo ID. You couldn't rent an apartment today. You can't get a six-pack of beer. Who's kidding whom around here? But you see, the Democrat Party and Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and so forth, they cease to exist, or at a minimum, they cease to be effective unless they promote race baiting and racism themselves. And that's what they are. They're in the race industry, not the colorblind industry, not the justice industry, but the race industry. So the Supreme Court's already ruled on this. And still, Eric Holder has zeroed in on Texas. You may not remember, but he gave a speech with incendiary terms attacking the Texas voter ID law to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He said many of those without IDs would have to travel great distances to get them, and some would struggle to pay for the documents they might need to obtain them. We call those poll taxes. No, we don't call those poll taxes. What a disgrace. What a demagogue. So in other words, folks, you have to pay a poll tax in order to get a photo ID to get on an airplane. So the government then is in the business of rampant, widespread racial discrimination. How stupid and ignorant is that? But it doesn't matter. Holder felt no urgency to offer any substantive information about exactly how many individuals would be inconvenienced by a photo ID requirement, or how those same individuals manage to function in their daily lives without a photo ID right now. So this is a completely fraudulent issue. Completely fraudulent issue. Because Eric Holder really is the opposite of wanting voter integrity. He wants voter fraud. You'll remember when the Justice Department interfered with the state of Florida that was trying to clean its voter lists of dead people, of people who had registered multiple times, people from out of state. And remember, they took action to prevent it, and a judge had to say, no, of course Florida can do this. As a matter of fact, Florida is required to do this. This is so important because we have the Justice Department, or as I call it, the Injustice Department, taking aim at Texas and, quite frankly, other states, not to advance the franchise, not to advance equality and justice, but the opposite. And let me add this point, my own point. Citizens have responsibilities in this country. If you can't figure out a way to get your hands on a free government photo ID, either to have a relative pick it up or have somebody mail it to you, or 1,000 different ways, then maybe you shouldn't vote. You have some affirmative responsibilities. You're not a baby. You're not a child. You're a mature adult. You're going to vote. So you should be required to take the most minimal, nominal steps to acquire information that you provide on Election Day to demonstrate you are who you say you are. That's not a poll tax. That's not a literacy test. And the Supreme Court has said so. Now, why am I talking about this? Because this from ABC News, and everything I just told you is not in this news story. And yet it's a little relevant, isn't it? The Obama administration will sue Texas to block its voter ID law, the Justice Department said today. The lawsuit will challenge the law under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. This is why the Voting Rights Act has become a joke, has become an absolute joke. The Voting Rights Act is used, abused, misused by a hack radical attorney general to prevent a state from issuing and requiring photographic identification to register and vote. Now, this Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or language. Now, if Texas were only giving voter IDs to black people or Hispanic people or Asian people or white people, that would be one thing. But they're not. Texas moved swiftly to implement its voter ID law after the Supreme Court in June struck down a requirement that states with a history of racial discrimination seek permission from the federal government to change their voting laws. By the way, the federal government has a history of racial discrimination. I mean, it was the federal government that passed the 2 fugitive slave laws. It was the federal government in the federal Supreme Court that issued the Dred Scott decision, the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, segregation, the earlier one upholding slavery. It was the federal Supreme Court with a federal administration that instituted the internment of Japanese Americans and Americans of descent only 60-some years ago. Supreme Court upheld it in the Korematsu decision. So who has a history of racial discrimination in this country? Seems to me not just certain states, but the federal government has it too. Eric Holder today. Today's action marks another step forward in the Justice Department's continuing effort to protect the voting rights of all eligible Americans. Do you see how the radical leftists lie and propagandize? We will not allow the Supreme Court's recent decision to be interpreted as open season for states to pursue measures that suppress voting rights. Suppress voting rights. A voter identification, a piece of information given by the state. So what are we doing now? Suppressing driver's rights if you don't have a driver's license? Suppressing smoking and drinking rights if you don't have a driver's license to show at the 7-Eleven? Suppressing your right to air traffic, to fly an airplane, to rent an apartment, to get a bank account? Despite the court's decision, the Obama administration has taken an aggressive stance on voting laws that it believes restricts minorities' voting rights. How in the hell does a voter ID card, a driver's license, or something akin to that discriminate against minorities? In the District of Columbia, where the mayor is a black man, where the city council has a number of black people on it, do they not issue driver's licenses in the District of Columbia? The answer is yes. Do they not require driver licenses in the District of Columbia to buy alcohol and cigarettes? The answer is yes. Do not landlords in the District of Columbia require driver's licenses or some form of photo ID to rent an apartment? The answer is yes. Is not the TSA a part of the federal government? Yes. Are not those employees civil servants? Yes, they are. Do they not require you to show a photo ID through security before you even get to the part where you have to take your clothes off and get on the airplane? Yes, they do. And they require it. Does not every state in the union, red, blue, purple, pink, require you to have a registration card? That is a driver's license in order to drive any kind of vehicle? The answer is yes. So what do they mean you're discriminating? What is that? And you know what's interesting about these lawsuits, ladies and gentlemen, because Landmark Legal Foundation has been involved in a number of them, including in Pennsylvania, which has a long history of slavery and segregation. Oops, wait a minute. The Quaker state was a free state, and the Underground Railroad was most active in Pennsylvania, and yet Pennsylvania is covered by this. So the question is, what's going on here? ABC News missed the entire story. ABC News is fed a press release, talks to government officials, and regurgitates what they're told. We have a Justice Department that is completely out of control, a Justice Department that is run by a complete political hack who comes out of a law firm that represented more terrorists at Guantanamo Bay than any other law firm. And he himself, Holder, he himself recommended that the FALN Puerto Rican terrorists get pardons. He himself, while at the Justice Department as Deputy Attorney General, helped work the system to make sure that Mark Rich, a big-time crook, would get a pardon. This is not a man of principle. He's a man of fanatical ideology. You stand strong, Texas, and all you other states. This is not discrimination. It's not a poll tax. It's not a literacy tax. The Supreme Court has said that this is constitutional.